the Scary Stories NYC Halloween special featuring ZakBabyTV and the return of PQ River begins right now.
The Apex Werewolf Slob Goblin Attack. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I talk to people online who tell me that Kentucky doesn't have cryptids, or at least not Dogman. Some people will acknowledge the various kinds of goblin sightings here, others accept the state's UFO or Bigfoot histories. But I'm here to tell you that Dogman is here in Kentucky too. I have a suspicion that he is an underground traveling animal, and since Kentucky has extensive natural tunnels and caves underneath almost every place in the region, it's only natural that this cryptid would at least be passing through from time to time or seasonally. One of the main reasons I suspect the Dogman of being an underground creature is that I myself have witnessed him engaged in some sort of violent conflict with some of our Kentucky goblins. I am of the opinion that the little men we see around here are not from outer space, but rather from underground. But before I get to all that, I should start by telling you my Dogman experience, which happened first before any of the rest of this story. I'll get back to the Dogman and the creepy little slob goblins in a couple minutes. My first Dogman sighting technically happened over in Crofton, Kentucky, not in Apex. I was driving down Route 189, aka North Greenville Road, which is a 2-lane tree-lined highway, when we started coming up to a gravel and dirt offshoot of the highway leading to another part of Christian County. Well, with no warning, off in the distance, out of the woods to my left, walked a big Halloween monster on 2 legs, with a dog-like head and giant claws that were just as large or even larger than a man's hands. Its arms were massive, but made to look even more terrifying by the nasty and large nature of the monster's sharp and dangerous-looking giant hand claws. It reminded me a bit of a satyr from ancient mythology, because from its belly on down it was covered with thick, heavy fur, but his chest and arms were covered far more lightly, like a man, allowing me to see that its skin tone was a dull gray, like a human corpse might be colored. If this were a corpse, though, it was a most healthy one, as the muscles bulged even as it strolled across the road. I saw it in profile as it passed me, and those legs were bent like an animal's hind legs, not like a man's legs. I saw that the forearm and the back of the hand on my side were covered in thick fur, and I saw that the head was long-snouted, like that of a canine. It had tall, pointed ears like a German shepherd, but the coloring was all dark gray as far as I could tell from seeing it lit in the distance by my headlights. By the time I drove past it, the creature had already crossed the highway and walked into the trees leading to that gravel road off to the right. I imagine he crossed that as well and continued on, because past that is just trees and woods for quite a long ways. Of course, I could be guessing wrong. It might have made a left and followed that road up into suburbia. Now, all of this happened in the same year, but I'm trying to remember what year it was. I don't have a single friend or relative from that era still alive for me to cross-reference these events with, and I don't recall any extreme weather events happening around then, which I could use to narrow it down to the exact year. The place I was living at the time was a home I had from 1971 through 1979, when my first marriage broke up. I'm going to place this story between the years 1972 and 1975, during the years before I understood that my marriage was in trouble. In those days, I just went to work at my hard but satisfying job, went out with my buddies, and took the wife out every other Saturday night. Life was cyclical, and I felt it would go on like that forever, and each day melded into the next one. And then one year in the middle of that period, we had a rash locally of people seeing not just the Dogman, not just the Goblins, but also Bigfoot and other weirdnesses. I'll tell you just one of my friend's stories from back in that year, so you can get the kind of strange energy that was flying around that autumn. I had a best friend back then that we can call JJ. One night when I was busy or sick or something, he and the rest of our gang went to hang out at Natural Rock Bridge. Now already they were probably too old to even be going there, but it had been one of our major hangout spots when we were teenagers. Assuming you're not from Kentucky, then I should probably explain that Natural Rock Bridge is just what the name states. It's a natural rock bridge between that intersection and some land on the other side of this small chasm. It's really cool to look at and to visit, as it's out of sight of most adults. That's made it a place that younger ladies and gents have traditionally gathered in to do teenagery things. Even in my day, it already had graffiti on it and trash in it. So according to my best friend JJ, on that night when my friends looked from the street side down to see if anyone was already hanging out on the stone bridge, they were surprised to see what they at first took to be very young children. Since it was dusk and getting darker, JJ and the others grew concerned about the kids climbing in that somewhat dangerous area with no parents or guardians supervising them. So I forget if JJ called out to the kids or one of the others did, but when one of them shouted to the children to be careful, they all looked up at JJ and my friends at the same time, in the exact same moment. And when JJ was looking directly at those faces, and they were looking directly back at him, he no longer saw them as children at all. First of all, children don't have long noses like old men. Second of all, children don't have long fangs shooting upward from their lower jaws. Also, no human children ever have had that sickly, verdant shade of skin. Their epidermis seemed, well, green. These weren't just animals, I was told, because they appeared to be wearing loincloths and using ropes to climb down the rock face. That demonstrates not only intelligence and tool use, but culture. Although their bodies appeared as hairlessly smooth as a newborn baby, their heads and faces were those of adult men, some of them possibly older men, in fact. JJ said that everyone just got back in the car, deciding to go hang out at someone's house instead. Nobody wanted to go down there that night once they saw the tiny, long-fanged green goblin men in the loincloths. In fact, none of my group ever wanted to go hang out down on the rock bridge again after that. Although, like I said, we had all pretty much outgrown that period of our lives by that point anyway. So these two things had happened within maybe 40 or 50 days from each other. It was like late August for the Dogman crossing the road, and early October for the Goblins being seen on the rock bridge. Something like that anyway. I might not be exactly right. It was all building up to that year's Halloween. That's how I look back on it, even if I couldn't tell what was going on while I was in the middle of it. Now, the part of Kentucky that I'm describing is not far from the alleged Kelly Hopkinsville location, where a family fought off an army of goblins they believed to be from outer space. In fact, this all happened in Christian County, same as that old story. I should point out, though, that although we are all discussing small humanoid-type creatures, the creatures the family described being attacked by are not like the ones my cousin saw, and the physical description my cousin made of what he encountered did not match the creatures who were in my sighting that I still have to describe for you. If we're going to go ahead and assume that these are real species inhabiting cavern systems under our feet, then there must be a whole variety of different kinds of little people down there. Not everyone assumes their physical existence to be real, though, at least not in the sense of an ordinary kind of existence. Not all researchers think that we are literally seeing what we think we see, when we perceive these little humanoids. For instance, if they are colored green, there are those who insist that we are actually sensing plant intelligence that our eyes and brain translate into this greenish humanoid. Like people who can sometimes see heat waves rising from the sand in the desert and combine that visual information with their imaginations to produce hallucinatory bodies of water, this theory holds that we can sometimes think we are seeing little men, even though the intelligence behind these visions may not actually be humanoid at all. I'm not saying I agree with those theories. In fact, I don't really know what I think about the goblins even all these years later, but I felt I should lay that out there on the table. These creatures or presences still seem very mysterious to many of us humans, and it's hard to just try to categorize them like an animal, or even as a kind of a person. Of course, when it came my turn to see the little things, I saw a whole lot of them all at once, and so it was a lot harder to make out any details about any specific member of their tribe. So now that I've established that I was already a Dogman experiencer, and I was well aware from my circle of friends that there were little green men being seen in our area, I'll go ahead and tell you my main experience. The vibe was a little different that year, obviously, and the missus wanted to skip our friend's Halloween party and just stay home, the two of us, watching TV and giving out candy to trick-or-treaters. It was a work night, and she was hoping to get to bed early. Although she hadn't seen any of the monsters herself, my wife seemed more than a little put off by the stories that our friends and I had been telling her about these creatures that we had been encountering. She, more than the rest of us, seemed to associate these incidents with the upcoming holiday of Halloween. Of course, she ended up being right about that in the end. A couple that we were good friends with came over to cheer us up, convincing us that we didn't need costumes to go to the party, and succeeded in getting the two of us to climb in their back seat to be driven there. We were all in the mood to relax and have some fun, but as it turned out, we would never make it to that party. Our friend was driving us along Flat Rock Cemetery Road, which sounds like a creepy haunted place in the middle of nowhere, but is actually a fairly modern style highway. It's got two very unscary lanes going in this direction, and two even less frightening lanes coming back in the other, with a bit of the grassy knoll thing going on in the middle. It was at night, and I suppose that made it a little scarier, but really, this was about the least spooky place that one could come across something as horrifying as what fate forced us to witness on that Halloween night around 60 years ago. I was sitting in the back seat of the car with my then wife, but I was looking out the front windshield, and I saw everything that happened in real time as it occurred. And it happened fast when it started. We had not noticed anything to warn us in advance to adjust our minds for the impossible. Suddenly, I saw what I first interpreted as a horse, rising quickly and in a panicked fashion up over the railing on the right side of the highway, and then tripping to fall face first onto the hard, cold blacktop of the road itself. I think we all screamed out in surprise, but that was nothing compared to what was still about to happen. Our driver screeched on the brakes and turned a hard left so that when our forward momentum was finally arrested and his engine stalled out, we were now at a 90-degree parallel angle to the road. That meant we could still see the creature I had interpreted as a fallen horse from the right side windows and the back windshield, and what we saw caused a whole lot more surprised screaming. The horse was lifting itself up and proved not to be a horse at all. This was a muscular man with a horse head, I briefly thought, but the broad chest and the dead-colored gray skin rang a bell. Soon I was understanding that I was viewing the long snout of a wolf or dog-headed animal, not a horse-headed one, even as it was all still clicking into place in my head that this might be a Halloween night encounter with the apex werewolf, that we already knew had been in the area, the incident suddenly became something much, much more. From the woods streaming under the barrier that the Dogman had tripped over spouted a literal army of small green little Smurf people. But I mean, nasty-looking Smurfs, and they were more green than blue. They had tiny bodies with really big feet like hobbits, but their faces made them look like meat-eaters, carnivorous predators. Their fangs were too long and large to stay in their mouths, and they appeared to be carrying sharp weapons with them as well. I do remember loincloths, and I remember what appeared to be steel helmets. The other three told me they saw no helmets, but they saw the men carrying metal shields. Since I was outnumbered on that subject 3-1, I suggest it's possible that I am misremembering the shields as helmets. The Dogman seemed to be the size of a large man, like an American football player or a bouncer at a nightclub. I don't think he was 7 feet tall, but he was a big fella. There were so many of the tiny, creepy little slob goblins drooling all over the place, chattering their noises that might have been a kind of language, and slicing that poor monster up with their tiny little weapons. I remember the words "death by a million paper cuts" going through my head, and I wondered if we were actually seeing that Dogman about to meet his end. The women were screaming at our driver to restart the engine, and to his credit, he was attempting to give them what they wanted. I, on the other hand, wanted to see how this fight was going to turn out. I hadn't thought that the Kentucky Goblins were meat eaters, or that if they were, they would try to hunt down prey as large and dangerous as the werewolf with the dog head that they were swarmed over like army ants. The dog-headed man stood up and shook them off mightily, but even as the nasty goblins flew off his shoulders, more climbed up his legs. As our friend, who was driving, succeeded in getting the car moving, he drove forward and got us off the grass and onto the highway heading back the way we came from. Nobody was thinking about wanting to go to the party any longer. The driver drove us home to his house, and as we motored away, I saw that Dogman pulled down to the asphalt by a remarkable number of the small, ugly, greenish warrior men. I can't tell you how that Halloween matchup turned out, but when we left, it certainly was not looking good for the lone wolf predator. I remember that my wife was really shaken up, and she wanted to stay over at our friend's house that night. And so we all just did that. We just sat there and got plastered. The husband brought out his 16mm projector and was going to run a print of some old horror movie that he got his hands on from the early 60s, but we just ended up drinking instead. We had been through a pretty upsetting experience. I think we mostly just wanted to calm our rattled nerves. So it's kind of funny how fast we forgot about the Dogman and the Goblins. Not literally forgot, obviously I'm telling you the story now, but it's almost like it was all somehow just a lead into Halloween for that particular year. After that day, nobody I knew was talking about monsters anymore. It was like the spell had been lifted. But now that I'm an old man, I can't help but think about it each year as the leaves change color and I begin to see the jack-o'-lanterns return to the front porches. If I had grandchildren, I suppose I'd tell them this story again and again, each year at Halloween time. I have no surviving family, though, so I can only tell all of you about the apex werewolf, slob goblin attack. Don't go anywhere, we're only getting started with this year's Halloween special. In fact...
Hello? Is anyone ready to receive talent? Mr. River has arrived to tell stories to the audience, people.
Oh, hi, Dr. Death.
Hello, Mr. Foot. Is my client's dressing room ready? Have all the M&Ms been removed from the bowls except for the ones where the logo is misprinted? Mr. River is a strict misprintitarian.
Henry, would you please show Dr. Death to the green room? Sure, this way, Doc.
Where is this young canine taking me?
As you can see, we've got both PQ River and ZakBabyTV coming up in this special. But first, here's an allegedly true story I'd like to tell you about. which we call Dogman Likes the Smell of Indian Food, or the Withlacoochee River Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a werewolf sighting with a friend of mine in Georgia. The strange part about it for us is that this was a place we had camped in a bunch of times when we were younger. This was sort of a reunion or for old times' sake kind of an event, with me and him getting back together to hang out in the woods that we had always felt so at home in when we were younger. But after so many years away, we found that we no longer felt welcome due to the fact that we seemed to have agitated and drawn the interest of a nasty, savage kind of animal man that we had never been bothered by before. This all took place in Georgia, but if you ask me, what we saw sounds an awful lot like either the werewolf of Wisconsin or else the Michigan Dogman. I've never seen anything like it, so maybe some of you know what I saw better than I know. This all happened because my friend Bud from college and I made friends again by accident through a series of coincidental circumstances that seemed amazing to us, but I'm sure you'd be bored by a retelling of. The important part was that we decided to go back and visit our alma mater at Valdosta State University in southern Georgia, just a wee bit north of Florida. It was around Halloween of that year, which is usually a nostalgic time of year for me personally. Our plan was to sightsee around Valdosta, notice what was the same or different from back in our day, then head off into the woods to recreate one of our camping trips from when we were still in college. That had been something we had done multiple times, and we always seemed to have fun, even experiencing a sense of some sort of momentary enlightenment when occasionally feeling close to the wilderness and the way things really work out in nature. So we had finished our nostalgia tour of the town and were getting emotionally ready to hike out west toward one of our usual secret camping spots. We were looking for a place to park the car to get out and hike when we discovered a most miraculous thing. An Indian food restaurant right on the western edge of Valdosta, Georgia. I mean, I suppose that's no miracle these days, but it certainly was a pleasant surprise for us. I had only had Indian food one time before in my whole life. I loved it and had been dying to have it again, but I couldn't even remember the name of what I had eaten. Bud, on the other hand, had lived for years in New York City after college, so he said he'd tell me what to order. These days, of course, they sell Indian food in chain supermarkets in many places in the USA, so you're probably laughing at the old boomer. But to us at that time, it was a rare delicacy, and we were going to get to dine out on it, out in nature. We parked in the lot in front of the Indian takeout place, got our food with Bud instructing me to get chicken vindaloo. Then we walked across James Circle, walking through the woods all the way over to the Withlacoochee River, where we set up camp. It was kind of dark by the time we were reheating the food over the fire. I have to say that the appetizers we ordered were the most remarkable foods I had ever eaten out under the stars, and I highly recommend that tandoori restaurant at the edge of Valdosta. They are not to blame for what happened next. Now you have to understand the nature of old college buddies back in the 20th century. We would tease each other. We would pull pranks on each other, even dirty tricks sometimes, but we always, or usually, took it in good nature, then planned a return prank on that guy. These days, you'd probably get banned from school for doing some of the things that we considered ordinary in those days. Now see, Bud knew I had a sensitive digestive system. He had known that since college, as I had a nervous stomach since I was a young kid. I have to stay away from the really extra spicy foods. Bud had told me to order chicken vindaloo, so I assumed that meant it was less spicy. No, basically that's the most spicy dish. My mouth was on fire at the first taste, and I had to drink a lot of our water supply. But Bud was laughing and rolling on the ground at my plight. He kept telling me to eat the bread instead of drinking the water, but it didn't matter. I was stressed out, and my stomach was on fire like an ulcer. I needed to get to a men's room, but the forest surrounding us was gonna have to do. As I ran to the cover of the trees, pulling my pants open and down along the way, Bud laughed loudly. In fact, even after I got into the darkness of the trees, I could still hear his laughter echoing. But I couldn't allow myself to care about that. I had a personal emergency unfolding. I was in no way prepared for something that hot, so I had to run to the woods and allow it to painfully bore a hole out of me. It was such an unpleasant experience that it took up all my intensity and presence to get through it, and I felt pretty tired afterward. I was panting for some time, catching my breath and cleaning myself up. Meanwhile, my friend was laughing and laughing and laughing in the background like a sound effects record loop. That's just how guys can be sometimes. I tried not to hear him, but in those few seconds before I got up the strength to zip up and walk back to camp, there wasn't much else I could do except to listen to him. And while I was doing that, I heard another sound. A sound quite different from the cackling of my college chum. This was a lower gurgling kind of a sound, one that reminded me of the sounds they have monsters make in scary movies. I wondered what in nature would make a sound like a large predator. Think about how stupid a question that is to ask yourself, and you'll realize that I was not fully back from the attack of the chicken vindaloo. I was still somewhat dazed. I was trying to visualize it in my head. I was wondering if a tree, or the wind, or a body of water, or something else like that nearby could somehow make a sound, like a big growling man-eater. What I wasn't wondering was why I was being growled at by a real, live, dangerous carnivore. I carefully and slowly stood fully up, using a tree for balance and pulling my jeans up at the same time. This caused that noise that sounded like growling to get louder, as though my sudden movement had agitated a big animal. This was the first moment when an alarm shot through me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline too. That might be a bear. That might be a big cat. That might be one of the guys from Deliverance. I tried manically to close my pants as I looked around, but when I saw the glowing eyes staring at me, I gave up trying. I grabbed those jeans with both hands and turned and got a good look at what that was. Its eyes were above my eye level, and I'm 6 feet. I've been 6 feet since I was 20. It looked like a demon, but it was hairy, not scaly. It had tall, pointed ears that reminded me of devil horns. Between those ears and the glowing, white, empty eyes, I really felt as though I were looking at something that had come from hell. Its teeth were on full display, as this creature wanted me to look at it, and wanted me to be intimidated. It took an unreal step in my direction, moving enough into view that I could see this wasn't a demon, but it wasn't a bear either. It, on the one hand, had this kind of Donnie Darko, this can't really be happening feel to it. Yet on the other hand, you saw those very real and very organic rows of dog fangs. It began to reach a hand out to me as I turned to run. That was one of the surreal things about it. The creature had a hand, not a paw. It had sharp-looking claws in place of fingernails, but that looked more like an opened hand reaching toward me than it did like a dog's paw. and the fact that he had the hand free to reach forward indicates that this was an animal used to walking on its hind legs. I ran through the small patch of trees, getting my face whipped by branches because my hands were too busy holding my britches up. I hobbled as fast as I could back to camp and went straight past Bud into his tent. It was the closer one. I heard him protesting that I was in the wrong tent, then asking me what was going on. His chattering quieted, and I heard him shout and curse out loud. He had seen it. The next thing I knew, Bud dove into the tent with me and zipped us up. I started to say something, but he shushed me. He was trying to hear if the creature was out there, if it had walked into our camp. The wind was blowing the leaves around enough that it was kind of impossible to tell if there might also be a creature out there crunching some of those leaves as well. It smelled pretty bad in the tent that night. My body was not equipped to process the chicken vindaloo, and so I found gases being emitted from the strangest places. Let's say it smelled like fire and brimstone for 20 feet around my butt on that night. But there was nothing Bud could say about it. He could have gone and slept in my tent, but he was too scared to go out there when he knew that Dogman might still be nearby. After some time, either exhaustion or suffocation from noxious gases allowed us to fall asleep. In the morning, we could tell by the sound of the birds singing that the Dogman was no longer around. And that's the end of the only cryptid story that ever happened to me. That was the night when I learned that Dogman likes the smell of Indian food. Or at least, that's the case with the Withlacoochee River Werewolf. A Dogman Collaboration. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I know that YouTube doesn't like you telling stories about hunting expeditions and so forth, but you don't have to worry about this one. I never got to fire even one shot. That's because I got interrupted by at least 2 dogmen. 2 that I could see with my own eyes. And I haven't been able to think about those woods and life in general the same way ever since. This happened, I guess, about 6 months ago. At the time, I tried to shrug it off. I didn't even tell anyone about it till over a week had passed since the incident. I had every intention of moving forward with my life as though nothing had happened, but the truth is, I haven't been back out in those woods alone one single time in the half year since this all went down. It affected me far more harshly than I would like to admit, and I guess if I'm going to be completely honest, this, for some reason, has traumatized me worse than my stint in the army, worse than anything that ever happened in my life. This was the scariest thing that I've ever lived through, but the scariest part of all is that I now feel like a stranger in the woods. I now no longer know what to expect in there. I now no longer know what is real and what is not. If werewolves are real, and if they're better hunters than we humans, then it's going to take me longer than 6 months to adapt to this new reality. I don't want to act like I've never been afraid of bears or mountain lions or snakes because that would be untrue. I respect nature, and I'm just wise enough to know to fear it as well. But those animals were sort of mutually agreed upon to be residents of the wilderness. I had always been assured that werewolves and dogmen were only figments of people's imaginations. If they're real, and if they live on my own hunting grounds, then what else might be out there? What else do we have to fear? It's overwhelmed me, and it's made me too paranoid to go into the woods alone anymore. All right, enough, I hear you saying. So what exactly happened to turn you into such a weak little chicken? What scared the poor little baby? Well, you better trust me. What I saw was so scary. It was life-changing scary. It was deeply disturbing scary. And you'd have been as freaked out by this as I was, and I am. So please put your cynicism to the side for a second, as I'm about to open up and get very real with you. I was sitting up in my deer blind. It's up in a tree in the woods behind my home. I don't know how far up it is, but I've never been sighted or smelled once, at least not by any natural creature. I had my eyes on a buck that was too far away, but was walking in my general direction. I was being as patient as I could, as this buck was such a prize that I was super excited to see him coming my way. I was lining up my shot and trying to stay calm, waiting for the perfect moment. Just a tiny little bit closer and he'd be in range. Without getting into details, I was going to be able to accomplish my goal in a very clean fashion. But before I could get him in the right spot, I pulled back from my viewfinder to survey the scene. That was when I noticed I was not the only one stalking that buck. Behind the large deer, out of his view but clearly in mine, there stood the strangest looking man I had ever seen. He had a costume on that I assumed was a ghillie suit of some new variety. I had only seen them in greenish hues, but this character was wearing a dark brown one. The hair was also shorter than the average ghillie suit, but the silhouette was clearly of a human torso. That meant, in my mind, that it could not be fur. It had to be camouflage of some sort or another. Maybe it was a hunter wearing animal skins, I guessed. He was far closer to my prey, and he was going to steal it from me. I only wondered why he hadn't taken the beast down yet. Just my luck, I thought, and I dropped my weapon, not wanting to risk hitting the other hunter. That was when everything changed. The scene changed, my mind changed, and the forest forever changed for me as well. That person I thought was a hunter wearing animal pelts tore out of his hiding spot and ran directly toward the large buck, barking and growling as he ran. Yes, that's what I said, because that's what I heard. The man was barking at the deer because that man was not actually a man. It was a sort of a humanoid dog that ran on its hind legs. I literally dropped my rifle but caught it before it fell to the ground. I'm talking about something as tall as a tall man. He looked bigger than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. He was not wearing clothing at all, but was instead covered in fur like a dog or a bear would be. When I say it ran on its hind legs, I don't mean it walked like a bear. I mean it ran out of hiding and charged at the deer, at least as fast as an athletic human being would be moving in that circumstance. This man had a dog's head. I mean, it looked just like a wild dog, and it barked and snarled in exactly that way. But this head was on 2 massive human-like shoulders. I felt like being sick. The scene I was witnessing was so completely wrong. The man-dog was creating a ruckus, and he had his arms over his head as he ran, something that a dog should not be able to do. He also was going to cause us both to lose that buck. He was just chasing it away, and it was making good its escape. And that is when the single most incredible and unexpected thing that ever happened to me played out in front of my eyes. That dogman wasn't scaring the deer off. He was scaring him directly toward another dogman. The second creature leaped out of hiding, and again, I won't get into details, but let's just say the deer was no match for his foe. With lightning swiftness, the 2 dog-headed men disappeared with their prize, with my prize, faster than any 2 men could have carried such a massive weight. And as they left, I saw the second one from behind. His legs were not normal legs. I mean, they were not normal in a human sense. Those were beast legs, like something you'd expect to see on Satan himself. I sat there for a long time after they left, finding that I had no ability to stop the tears from streaming down my cheeks. I'm not ashamed to say I cried like a baby. A silent baby, though. I couldn't move. I was frozen up there. The idea of coming down and walking through those woods was so terrifying to me that I actually considered sleeping there that night and trying again to climb down in the morning. Every leaf, every branch that I saw blowing beneath me made me jump and panic. How many more of those dogmen were down there? How many more were waiting for me to climb down out of my blind? Had those two really been the only ones? Was it really safe for me to come down? I never suspected that second one was there. How could I know for sure that the forest wasn't swarming with them? I sat there for a good 2 hours before I had the nerve to jump down out of that tree and run home. And the only thing that gave me the strength to do that was that I knew my wife would be getting worried about me. I wanted to see her face again so badly. I wanted to hold her in my arms again. And I wanted my life back. Eventually, I just decided that I was either going to make it back home, or else I was going to give my wife a legitimate reason to worry about me. And so I climbed down, and then I ran home like a frightened child. And that's because, next to the idea of multiple dog-headed beast men, I was and am nothing more than a frightened child. Everything I'd ever heard or read about the Dogman told me they were solitary hunters. The idea of that is horrifying enough. What I saw was cooperation between two adult males. I witnessed with my own eyes a Dogman collaboration.
If you watch videos about Dogman and other scary subjects, then you probably already subscribe to the popular YouTuber who is going to read this next story. They call this talented young man ZakBabyTV, and he calls this Dogman story The Central Florida Dogman.
Back in the late 1990s, I got in all kinds of trouble as a kid. I'm an only child, and I lived in a small town in Central Florida. This occurrence I don't really speak about too often to too many people, but I feel like maybe it's good just to get this off of my chest. Plus, I've been hearing a lot of other stories on YouTube lately, so I don't think I'm the only one at this point. I was 17 at the time, so was my girlfriend back then. I had stolen a few beers from my stepdad's ice chest on the back patio one night and planned to have a little freaky-deaky out in the woods that was in the neighborhood. There was an opening area on the fence in the back area of the colony neighborhood that we all lived in. Once you go past that area, there was this open area that was completely hidden away from anyone in society. This spot was a perfect place. My stepdad was rarely ever home, and my mom worked 2 different jobs. My girlfriend only had her mother. Her father was never in the picture, which made things a hell of a lot easier for me. So we were out there handling our business, as teenagers do. It was on a Friday night. We didn't have to worry about school or anything like that in the morning. It was hot and humid, but it would have been that way either which way you look at it, judging by our physical activity for that night. But this was during summertime, and the heat just doesn't really go away in Central Florida, or any part of Florida for that matter. Sometime that night, we were just looking up at the stars, relaxing and smoking. We started hearing these weird noises somewhere off in the bushes behind us. We couldn't tell how far it was, but it was definitely noticeable that we were no longer alone in the woods. We started to get our things and get dressed and get the hell out of there. There's quite a bit of homeless people in the area, and I didn't want any pervs just watching us. So we started to gather our things, put our clothes back on, and we started to walk towards the direction of that open area in the fence, which led back to the area where we lived at. In the meantime, as we were walking, we started hearing movement in the woods. Definitely someone or something was following us in the woods, and it sounded like whatever it was getting closer. We pushed our things through, and we both crawled through the hole back into the neighborhood. As we started to cross the street, I happened to glance back at the wooded area beyond the fence line. And that's when I saw it. The black silhouette of some kind of giant dog on its back legs just staring at us, gripping on the fence with its huge-looking claw-like hands. Not paws. The weirdest part about it was, this thing was on its back legs, leaning against the fence, and its eyes were glowing.
Why was that girl standing by the Dogman? I'm PQ River, and this is a most peculiar tale. Every autumn, when the leaves change color, I think about the Dogman and I think about a strange woman I used to know. Well, I sort of knew her. Let's say we met. In the spring and summer, that entire period of my life seems like nothing but a half-forgotten dream. But then, each holiday season, it all comes back to life in my memory. It was October, and I was walking around the neighborhood in Hanover, Pennsylvania that I lived in, enjoying the Halloween decorations that people used to really go all out creating in those days. I don't recall which block I was strolling on, but I didn't realize that I had boogied right out of town until I saw that I was surrounded by woods on both sides, and the road had somehow turned into a local highway leading into the country. The sun was setting. The sky was turning as many colors as the leaves of the trees, and I calmly turned around, breathing the country air and feeling grateful to be where I was in that place and time. As I made my way back to town, I noticed a young woman standing on the sidewalk with long, straight, brown hair and red-framed glasses. She was staring intently at a bus stop schedule on a sign next to the bus stop. It was only because I glanced up at that girl that I noticed the Dogman. I would have just kept my head down and walked past there, never seeing the creature at all. If I could go back in time, I think that's what I would do. Not look at the girl. Not turn my head in her direction. I would keep on shoegazing and I would keep on trucking, put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll be stepping out the door, that sort of thing. But that's not what I did. What I did was look, and when I looked, I saw more than I wanted to see. Standing almost directly behind her from my point of view, lurking behind some trees, but in the process of emerging onto the dirt leading to the sidewalk, was an upright, walking anid, also known in some circles as the North American Dogman. It was either that or a werewolf, because it had a head that one could describe as lupine or canine, and it stood upright on its hind legs. I could see one leg clearly, and it was a dog's hind leg. This was not a human being at all. It was some kind of animal, like a short-haired brown dog with tall ears and bright, shiny eyes. When I reacted in surprise to seeing him, the Dogman in turn noticed me. He immediately halted his movement toward the girl. I really think he was about to walk out of the woods behind her. Instead, he altered course and appeared to leave the scene entirely through some trees to his left and my right. I couldn't tell if he really had gone or if he had only found a new hiding spot to spy from, and I remained concerned, my eyes scanning those woods for any movement as I approached the woman with the red-framed glasses. She called to me and asked if I could help her understand if the bus that stopped there was the one she needed to catch. I had to admit to her I'd never even noticed there was a bus stop there before. I shook her hand and found out her name was Dora. She seemed to have never been in my town before. While we both tried to decipher the information on the sign, an actual bus pulled up and she got on to quiz the driver instead of me. Apparently, this was indeed her bus because she didn't get out again before it drove off. Realizing I was now alone and that the Dogman might possibly still be in the woods watching me, I made tracks for home at a higher rate of speed than usual. So you wouldn't think that much of that girl's presence during my sighting, except that I had a grand total of 0 + 1 = 1 other cryptid sighting in my entire life. It was also of a Dogman, and once again, present but apparently oblivious as to what was going on. There was Dora. So, this was about 1.5 years after the first incident, and I was camping with my friend of that era named Mikey. We were in the woods called the Michaud State Forest. It sounds like it's in France, or at least Canada or something, but actually it's just a few miles to the west of the first incident at the bus stop. This is wilderness, though, not the suburbs at all. Mikey and I were climbing up this tall hillside. We were looking for a place to camp that would afford us a majestic view off the tall hill for miles around. We made jokes that we wanted to find a view that they would charge $1 million for if we were shopping for a condo. We passed some stunning, gorgeous views, but Mikey only rated them as around $500,000. On that night, we were going for the big bucks view and nothing less. As we twisted around this mountain, slowly trekking up toward the top, Mikey stopped in front of me so unexpectedly that I almost walked into him from behind. He pointed to the woods off to our left and slightly higher in elevation than we were. He turned toward me with a confused expression and asked me confidentially, "What is that girl doing there?" I looked, and instantly I recognized the red-framed glasses. Was that Dora, or just somebody with similar hair and glasses? I took a step up the hill in her direction, then froze when I saw it. No, that was too large a coincidence. There was something that looked like a large brown wolf in the trees behind the woman, apparently stalking her. It had the same kind of glowing eyes as the creature that I had seen the first time. I nudged Mikey and whispered, asking him if he could see that dog beyond her in the woods. When he asked me if I meant the brown one, I knew I wasn't just imagining it. And then, with both me and Mikey watching, that brown wolf dog rose up in the air. I gasped because I honestly thought I was seeing that canine levitate. Within a second or two, we could both clearly see that the animal had merely been sitting or squatting when we first saw it. Then it rose up to be standing on its hind legs. Mikey, being entirely unaware of my prior experience with either the Dogman or this young lady Dora, stood up himself and shouted, waving his hands over his head. He ran toward the woman, screaming that she was in danger, and I ran after him, keeping my eyes on that upright, short-haired brown canine. This time, I would say that Dogman was even angrier looking than the first time I saw him. When he walked away on that night, he almost sulked, and his eyes never left mine until there were trees between us blocking our view of each other. I felt that the expression on his face spelled out a desire for retribution, and I no longer had a sense of safety while on that mountain. When I caught up to Mikey, he had already succeeded in annoying Dora, who assumed that he was just being forward and attempting to pick her up. It was hard for me to find out why she was alone in the woods, because she seemed to think that we were two guys trying to get too personal with her. I pushed Mikey away and told her that she and I had already actually met, but she wouldn't even look at me by that point, so we stopped bothering her. She and the Dogman both seemed to want us to leave, so I made that happen. I had told Mikey we needed to climb back down the mountain before it got dark. He and I had both seen the Dogman, so I didn't have to tell him why I didn't want to go up any further. Mikey asked if we should go for the $500,000 view or the $250,000 one closer to the ground. I suggested we go for the $69.99 view from the cheapest motel we could find in the area. I wanted to be behind a locked door on that night, and that flea bag hotel was worth every penny, cockroaches and bad Wi-Fi or no. In fact, Mikey wrote a riddle that night. It went like this: when is a man grateful to see a cockroach? And the answer is, when he was expecting to see a Dogman. Dora, if that was her real name, was the person who really taught me what it meant to be paranoid. When anyone tells me that she was at both Dogman experiences by chance, I stop talking to them. Either she was placed at both sightings, or else she placed herself there knowingly, then feigned ignorance. I couldn't figure out what her deal was, but I knew she was part of something going on behind my back. Something going on behind my mind. Something, someone, some people out to gaslight me, to make me feel internally dizzy inside my brain, to make me uncertain, to create a situation where I doubted my own sanity. How did she manage to be at both Dogman sightings? Did she cause the sightings to happen? If so, how did she know where I would be? I know she's real. I shook her hand when we first met. I know she exists in 3 dimensions plus time. But do I know for a fact that the Dogman is real? Could the Dogman be something she causes me to see, something she wants me to be afraid of? If that's the case, then she's already quite successful, since I'm quite scared of both her and it. I can't even be sure the creature is physically real, but still, she has me terrified at the thought of it. I have dreams where the Dogman spends years tracking me down to get revenge on me, but I never even find out what I did that was supposed to have been so offensive. I spent years in therapy talking about what I was going to do the next time I ran into Dora and her Dogman. Then my 30th birthday passed, and I realized I hadn't seen Dora or that Dogman for 8 years. Sometime in my 30s, I finally stopped going to therapy about the Dogman and that girl. I haven't seen either of them again, and it's been 40 years now since the second sighting. I celebrated the 40th anniversary privately this year. It still remains very real and very current to me inside my mind. It still feels like an open wound. But I live in Baltimore these days, and the chances of seeing a Dogman here are non-existent. In spite of this, I still feel stressed that the Dogman might come after me, and I still get the dreams. The main improvement is that now I feel better after I wake up. It's been so long since all this happened that if I saw Dora again, I probably wouldn't even recognize her. Certainly, she would have moved on from her red-framed glasses decades ago. I gave myself permission to forget about this situation every day, and yet barely an hour goes by that I still don't wonder, why was that girl standing by the Dogman? Are you ready for another Dogman story by ZakBabyTV? And the name of this one is The Beast of Northwestern Oklahoma.
Me and my best buddy were hiking over in northwestern Oklahoma. Since this whole pandemic thing has happened, we kind of ran out of things to do. I haven't worked in over 6 months, yet my friend hasn't worked for even longer than that, but that was personal choice prior to the pandemic anyways. He's just a lazy son of a gun. That's why we got involved with hiking. I wanted to get him outside and really get some fresh air and do something with himself. He's the type of guy that will sit there and play video games for 10 hours without even getting up to use the restroom. I'm not even quite sure how that's even physically possible with the amount of soda he drinks in the process. And me, on the other hand, I drink quite a bit of soda myself, in moderation of course, but I do consider myself to be kinda active. I like to go camping, and I like to go hiking too. I work with kids for a living, so I'm usually on my feet running around anyways. We were hiking on this trail that was really an all-age trail. There wasn't anything in particularly difficult about it. Heck, even the incline was at a minimum. It was one of those big, giant, windy loops and eventually led you right back to your parked car in the parking lot. We were probably 3/4 of the way finished with the trail. We were making our way back towards the car when we started hearing these weird noises around us, surrounding us, echoing amongst the trees. At first, we thought it was just local wildlife. Rodents, rabbits, raccoons, possums, whatever. But then we started to notice the little details about the sounds. It was no longer a scuffling sound, more like snapping sounds, like whatever was in the woods was stepping on branches, snapping twigs while they go through heavy brushes. Things like that. There was a few times where we actually stopped ourselves on the trail and just looked around our surroundings, trying to see what direction these noises were even echoing from. To no avail, we eventually shrugged it off and just continued walking, but at this point, at a much faster pace. Eventually, I made it back to the car. My friend had to take a leak, and I told him I'm not going to wait around for you, and I'm starting to kind of get freaked out from the weird noises. My friend just told me to chill out. There's nothing out in the woods to even be afraid of. I'm just going to go take a whiz. I'll be there in about a minute or so. So I continued on and met him by the car. When he was on his way back to the car, Probably about maybe 45 seconds to like a minute, if that. I saw him running towards the car as I had just entered the car myself on the passenger side. He was running in complete fright and panic. His arms were out in front of him, wailing all around. He eventually got to the driver's side door, opened the car and hopped inside, locking everything within seconds. He was completely out of breath and in total fright. He grabbed the keys from me, started up the vehicle, and backed out of the parking spot. I asked him what the hell was going on, and he just was mumbling something, like he was talking to himself and completely ignoring me, and I was right next to him in the car. It started to freak me out. I've never seen my friend act like this before. He's supposed to be some kind of tough guy, but right now, he was looking like the biggest wussy I've ever seen. A few minutes later, he finally started to make sense, and he was explaining to me what had happened to him when he was taking a pee out in the woods when I had already left back to the car. He told me he started hearing more movement sounds, but this time it sounded like it was right on top of him. He said he was starting to freak out, rushed his business, zipped up, and as he was backing out back onto the dirt trail, that's when he saw this large black silhouette of something with pointy ears and glowing red eyes staring back at him about 20 feet away in the brush. It freaked him out so bad, he just ran back to the car. Luckily, whatever was out there watching him didn't follow.
Hey everyone, it's the new Henrey Lee Dogman throw pillow. It's just like laying your face up against me, except the claws and teeth on the pillow won't tear you to shreds, hooray! Also, it doesn't smell like a wet dog, woohoo! Look right below this very video to find out how to order. It's the softest way yet to support the channel and keep us online.
Here's another one from ZakBabyTV that we call A Dogman in Kansas.
Back in 2018, I was accompanying my parents with a family reunion up in Kansas. We live in eastern Tennessee, and it wasn't terribly too far of a drive to get there. I'm born and raised in Tennessee, but I guess somewhere off down in history, all our family is originally from Kansas. Land with no mountains and tornadoes, to the Smoky Mountains and potatoes. Either which way, both places are pretty nice. Southern hospitality, good barbecue, and very nice people. So we arrived at my grandmother's house. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to disclose what town she lives in, but just know it's one of the big ones. But she lived on the outskirts of one of those big ones, and she owned quite a bit of acreage. I remember I was just hanging out with my cousins on the back of her property. She had several acres of just flat, tall grass land, with nothing in sight but brush. There's really not much to see. It's really a sight for sore eyes. So we were just out there, walking around. The sun was starting to set. Evening was upon us. We didn't pay it no mind because, again, we were on my grandparents' property. We really had no worries. Nothing's ever happened to us, plus it was a family reunion. We were only there for a few days. We were starting to turn around and make our way back towards my grandparents' house because I had to use the restroom. That, and it was getting close to supper time. Right before we were all about to just turn around and head back, my cousin had pointed something out in the distance. At first, I didn't see a thing, but he had to explain it to me in detail, and I had to follow his finger to see exactly where he was actually pointing to. And that's when I saw it. We saw it. This giant black beast running across the brush at least 100 yards away. In other words, like a whole frickin' football field. That's how far it was. But you could tell whatever the hell it was not a human being. It was pitch black like the night, but you could tell if it was a human it was wearing a full-on hoodie with a mask, or it was some type of canine beast running on its back hind legs. And I swear to you, squinting, now with our eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could tell that whatever that thing was had glowing red eyes.
He's back, ZakBabyTV, with a story entitled The Wild Boar That Was a Dogman.
When I was a kid, I would periodically go hunting with my dad. My dad was an avid hunter that would hunt all kinds of different animals in the appropriate seasons, but there was one thing that he would hunt the most compared to any other animal: wild boar. This particular story happened when I was with him on one of his trips with a couple friends. This happened back in the day when I was an early teenager. I was 13 to be exact, and this occurrence happened in eastern Texas. Usually when I would go out with my dad, I would just carry all of his equipment with him. Spare bullets, weapons, things like that. He rarely would ever let me shoot anything. Heck, he barely even let me practice with some soda cans. But that's okay. I didn't really want to shoot any animals anyways. I was just there because he told me to be. Trying to remember this occurrence is difficult, yet at the same time, certain parts of it are clear as day still. I know we were out at night. He had a couple of his friends, and they were just doing what they do. They were hunting. I was in the back behind him, trying to keep quiet because they didn't like me making any noise. Like I said, I was 13. I was carrying some spare ammunitions in their waters as they frequently went out in different directions in the woods hunting for these wild boar. After some bit of time, somehow I ended up lost by myself in the woods. Usually I'm pretty good about keeping up with my dad, and he checks up on me. But for some particular reason, that night, I lost my way. My dad has told me time and time again, if we ever get separated, don't keep walking. Stop and stay exactly where you are. I'll find you. He always told me that's how people venture off and get completely lost. If they keep going, they may be going in the wrong direction and they'll never find each other for several hours, or maybe not at all. He said that's why it's best just to stay put. So, that's exactly what I did. I just sat there. On a rock, there was this 2.5 foot, maybe 2 foot rock that was just out there in the dirt, and that's where I made my chair for quite a while. I lowered all the ammunition and the waters in the dirt on my right-hand side, and I just waited. It was already dark, and I was starting to get creeped out. I could hear the crickets chirping. I could hear some frogs out in the distance as well. After a while, though, I could hear some movement out in the brush and thought it was either one of my dad's friends or my dad himself. So I called out into whatever was out there in the darkness. Dad? Somebody. It's me, Chris. Silence. All movement and any sound of any insect or anything whatsoever ceased at that very moment. It's like somebody had muted the entire forest when I called out my name. But after about a minute or so later, that silence was broken by something out there breathing heavily. And it was no man. I stood up on the ground on my 2 feet, getting off of that rock. I was totally in alert mode now. I had no weapon outside of a buck knife. My heart was pounding out of my 13-year-old chest at that time. At first I thought it was a wild boar. I mean, that's why we were out there to begin with. But then I started to question that, as I didn't see anything at all. But I heard something breathing. I don't think whatever was out there was a boar, because I don't think that boar would just toy with me like that. I remember pulling out my knife and just circling around in the woods, not moving far from the current area that I was in. I didn't want to venture off into somewhere I had no idea where I was. I only had a little flashlight on me at the time. I don't remember how much time had passed. Not much, I can remember that much. But I remember seeing this black silhouette of some giant beast out there amongst the trees not too far from my current location. My whole body was frozen in place. I couldn't even move a muscle. I barely could get my flashlight to beam in that direction as it was. Whatever that thing was, I don't believe it was a boar. Its eyes were glowing, and it had pointy ears, and it was much bigger than any boar I've ever seen before. Right then and there, my dad and his buddies came walking up behind me, asking if I was okay and how I got left behind. When I turned back in the direction where I saw that silhouette of whatever it was gone. I told my dad about the whole situation. He believed me. I thought he was going to make fun of me with his friends, but they all had the same concerned look on their faces when I told them about what I had seen. My dad later told me that what I probably encountered wasn't a boar at all. It was probably a dogman.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.